Welcome to the AI Surge podcast, where we explore how AI is shaping industries and accelerating innovation. I'm your host, Serge Jubal, and today I'd like to welcome everyone to Robert Schmeichel, founder of Canada's podcast, Europe's podcast, and Emirates podcast, with a track record of driving deals across tech, gaming, and media. Welcome, Robert, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Serge. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's always fun to chat. I think we bumped into each other at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, but we share a passion for tech. You've got a great track record of working with multinational companies, doing some great things for them. I think we spoke briefly about. I was quite surprised we hadn't met before because I led the marketing and sales at the BC Tech Association, and I love a podcast. So this podcast and then this kind of empire you've kind of created, which is really impressive. So yeah, I'm looking really forward to this.
Yeah, I'm happy to share it with you.
So maybe let's start with your journey, Robert, like in terms of your career and kind of your path to where you are now. What did that look like?
Yeah, it started I born and raised in Vancouver. So my whole life spent in Vancouver and lived in Burnaby for a little while. And then when I was a little bit older, when I got out of high school, immediately moved to California, Silicon Valley. So I think I was 18, 19 at the time. And I was down there for about 6 years. And so I was down there and I went to San Jose State University and I worked in traditional ad agencies in traditional print, video, television, direct mail, and did a lot of different broadcast media and things like that, but stuck with the traditional media that agencies for big accounts. And then when I came back to Vancouver, worked for some big oil companies working on big accounts, Rogers Cantel, which was Cantel Rogers at the time. So I was kind of moving into a little bit of the digital age. And then I was in the appliance business, believe it or not. I was for about 7 years. I was in the appliance. That's Maytag, Gen Air, Magic Chef, traditional media, again, radio, television, sponsorship with the Vancouver Canucks, things like that. So I kind of stayed in my comfort zone. And then this thing called the internet came in the late 90s. And once I got onto that, it kind of just changed everything for me. I was no longer just relying on print, radio, television, magazine, and direct mail and things, and which was my specialties, and doing creative concepting. And so I started branching into that. And then lo and behold, I went back to Silicon Valley again. And then I started working for tech companies. And I just dove right into it and started working strictly on online. And this is like 2001 to 2000, before 9/11, was quite heavily into that, and then came back to Vancouver. And by then I was kind of left the traditional advertising media behind. I'd spent so many years in that, working for ad accounts and things like that, that I felt this is where I wanted to be. And so lo and behold, I got relocated after being in Vancouver for a couple of years, got relocated to Costa Rica. And I came down here to Costa Rica and I started working for tech companies, particularly in gaming. And I just loved it. It was great. And they all wanted me to stay because it was back then, no one did remote work. No one could do this. So I was like, well, okay, but I live in Vancouver. They said, well, why don't you stay here in Costa Rica? So I said, okay, I'll try it out. So I did a bit of back and forth. And then after that was finished, I went to Antigua. And I was in Antigua, which is a small Caribbean island. And then it just started. From there, I was there for a year. So I relocated. This is part of how I got into podcasting. So I got relocated to Antigua, this Caribbean island, working for these gaming companies, there for about a year and a half. And then I got pulled back to Costa Rica, stayed here for about 2-3 years working. And then I was shipped off to different locations like Malta. I went to Malta for a couple of years. Then I went to Brazil for another year or two. So I wasn't in Vancouver much anymore. I was kind of gone because these companies were asking me to stay put, not leave. And I was just kind of like being paid to travel. You're there, you're seeing you're not traveling, you're working. You're working long hours and you're there amongst the locals and you're doing your thing. And so I periodically would come back to Vancouver, but I found I was completely disconnected because I was not doing much business in Vancouver anymore. And so podcasting came along. I started listening to it. I actually loved it. I was learning from it. I was getting my content from it because I walked a lot, went to the gym a lot, did a lot of exercise, things like that. And in my ears, I was learning about entrepreneurship, self-development, things like that on my travels. And also it kept a way for me to be in touch with Vancouver because, I'd watch the news and different things like that. I came back and I said, okay, I'm here for a while. And when I got back, I started realizing I don't really know that many people anymore. I mean, the traditional world I left behind, the ad agency world I lived in was kind of, changed. And so I was in a different universe. And so I was listening to podcasts. So I said, you know what? One day I just thought to myself, I'm going to start my own podcast. What is it going to be? And I loved entrepreneurship. I love being in business. I love the climate. I love the vibe. And so I started the VancouverEntrepreneur.ca podcast. I liked the sound of it. I didn't want to call it BC Entrepreneur because BC is, as you know, it's a province of Canada and stuff like that. But Vancouver had a little bit more of a sexier world-class view because Vancouver's a world-class city. Started cold. Literally, I was like Edward Norton in Fight Club. I was at every single networking event, every conference. I was like, there's that Robert guy, the Vancouver. He's gonna ask me to come on his podcast again. And this is back many, many years ago. And so I just ground it. I just was getting more people, and I just was interviewing lots of people, and it started picking up steam. It started, getting more popular. I said some Aaron Stevens on the show. I had Praveen Varshney on the show. I had Jennifer Hamilton on the show, some really well-known Vancouverites people, and a lot of different people that came on the show. And they were contacting me now to come on the show. No longer did I have to tread every single conference, meetup, you name it, in the street. I was one of those guys up on the tables, come by on my podcast. They'd say, yeah, sure. Some people would be like, oh, podcasting, what's that? But, over time it started building up. And over time I said, what if I took the Vancouver and cookie cut that across to Calgary? What if I did that in Edmonton? What if I did that? And being disconnected away from Canada for so long, I really didn't know anyone out east. So I was on a podcast and I found this guy in Ontario. And from there, we built out Canada's podcast, and we were getting hosts in each province, in each city that were well known, vetted, and it just blew up from there. And so it remains the same, very fundamental, very grassroots, talking about entrepreneurship, what they do, why they do it in the country or the city they live in. And it was just, the format was already there. We just kind of plugged that into different places and gave each host the questions, and they could obviously change that. And then just uplifted from there. And we had the federal government, we had eBay, we had Best Buy, we had a lot of different people come on, sponsors, and it was a lot of fun.
Sounds like you're not afraid to try new things. Like you're right, the podcasting space, as much as we're comfortable with it now, that wasn't always the case. And
No,
and you seem to be like the original digital nomad. Like they have the term for it now, but
not knowing I was going there, but digital nomads are able to work from, different things. But I had to, even though I was a consultant for these companies, I was required to be there. And then a lot of the times when I would go there and I would have my podcast going, because after a while being in Vancouver I think I was there for 5 years, and I got Vancouver going and Canada's podcast going. Once it was going, it was operating out of Toronto. My partner was in Toronto and he had the full infrastructure there. So I said, okay, now I've been kind of working at this for about 5 years now. The opportunities came up again. I had to go back to Malta, and I was going to different countries again, but I was still maintaining Canada's podcast and Vancouver Entrepreneur. And I was, believe it or not, I was interviewing people at oddest times, 2, 3 in the morning with time zones and things like that. I just kind of kept at it. I just genuinely loved it, and talking to entrepreneurs and sharing stories and I'm a very curious person. I think to be in business we're in, to be podcasters or people that are able to listen and want to get knowledge, not just for myself, but for other people, you have to be genuinely curious and relentless about being curious, so that you have your questions, your things you want to know. But I always have been a big believer in self-development. I want to know the books you read. I want to know your morning routines. I want to know what your challenges and how you overcome them. What are your go-to things for education? What different things are you doing? Usually fitness, mindset, and how the businesses got going and things like that. So I try and incorporate that into anyone who I interview. But I think curiosity, if you were to ask me what is my main trait that makes me keep going, is my curiosity to learn from other people and listen to their stories and see if I can tease out anything that's going to be valuable to the listener.
that's the definition of growth mindset, huh? Like just being
Yeah.
wanting to learn. And I appreciate that so much because it's kind of the one thing I'm trying to instill in my kids. They're men now, but they're 22 and 21. Is I'm like, guys, every day, just exactly what you said, do something that makes you smarter, richer, or stronger, and just flex the different muscles for self improvement. So I love that theory.
Yeah, no matter how small, right? It could be very small. That's I tried, there's a lot of non-negotiables in my life. I have to do some reading every day, some form of exercise, some form of listening to a podcast or getting information. Even when I go to sleep at night, I listen to like I go to sleep with some kind of self-development talking or something like that is a podcast or something. Or when I'm at the gym, I'm always trying to get content of some kind. So it's health and mind, body and mind.
Good for you. If for those of you who know Robert, and for those of you who don't, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and it turns out we have a lot of shared interests, like we talked about, business and fitness and podcasts. But you'll see a bit of a discrepancy. I'm wearing a sweater. He's got a fan going, so I should have introduced that. Robert was, as he's in
I'm in
Costa
Costa
Rica right
Rica.
now, so we're having this digital nomad conversation in real time.
Yes, living
So
living it.
Robert, then tell me that. So you started with Canada's podcast, but now you've kind of moved beyond that, correct?
Yeah, so now what I've done is, I've moved on to Europe. So I'm putting up a lot of my time and energy. It's funny because I'm not in Europe, obviously. I'm not from Europe, even though my ancestors, my great-grandfather and stuff came from Europe. But I've now launched a podcast called Europe's Podcast, and I was kind of going for about 3 or 4 years, but I didn't put it really much effort into it. And then we had an opportunity in Lisbon, Portugal, and I found someone who was a host in Barcelona, Spain. And I asked him if he would go to Lisbon, Portugal for Web Summit, a big tech conference. And because I had booked a podcast booth there, I had the site, all the materials. I'd been working on this thing in the background for probably 3 or 4 years quietly. Same format, same principles as VancouverEntrepreneur.ca, Canada's podcast. It's all about grassroots, being local. What can we learn about the locals that live and work there? And it could be tech, it could be real estate, it could be yoga, it could be anything that's entrepreneurship driven. And we did the same fundamentals. So I partnered with a company in Malta and then a company in Barcelona. And so we just started building it out, went to Lisbon. And first time I actually went to Lisbon was in 2000, I think 22. And I did not get a good response. I was asking people like, I went back to my days of Vancouver Entrepreneur, walking up to people and say, will you come on my podcast? And they just didn't know what that was or didn't care what that was. And so I said, okay. And this is a good lesson to learn. If you fail once, which I did miserably, I really failed miserably in Europe in 2022, didn't get anyone to respond or come on the show. And then once I got another sponsor, he did the show. We were expecting probably to come to the booth. I was expecting maybe 10 if we got super, super, super lucky. We had 57 people show up that wanted to come onto the podcast and wanted to be interviewed that were entrepreneurs. They saw, I guess, Europe's podcast. They saw Canada because we're kind of tethered. Canada's podcast as well as Emirates, and they're all tethered together. If you go to About Us, you can either listen to Canada, Europe, or Emirates. And I think people started to get it. And so we did a ton of interviews, published them all, and things just kind of took off. And so now we've got some other stuff in the books that we want to start to build up. But now Europe's podcast has got some wings on it, and we're really happy about that.
So I guess the key there, from what I'm picking up, from what you're putting down, is persistence, right? If it doesn't go super well the first time, keep going at it.
Yeah, even if the first time was pretty humiliating because I got some people that, a lot of abrupt no's and people said yes. And then they led me down a trail that was like, nowhere. But yeah, and then I thought, it was funny. There's a good story I'll tell you. Had almost given up. I was like, okay, yours podcast is just shelve it. And I had interviewed this one guy in Malta and he kept emailing me and he said to me, when are you going to publish my podcast? And I was like, oh, God, I don't want to do this. And I just couldn't face it. So I just kept on putting him up. And he was persistent. So every week he would email, when are you going to publish my podcast? And I was like, okay, that's it. So here I am. I pull myself out of bed, get to publish it, do all the stuff. And then this other person contacted me, another person. So I kind of owe it to this one guy who just told me, where's my podcast? You said you'd publish it. I want to know where it is. But he kept coming back at me. And I was like, this guy's relentless. And so I kind of owe it to him in a lot of ways because he pushed me to publish, stick to your word. You said we publish it. And I said, okay. And then lo and behold, it just started snowballing and so I kind of never told them this, but it was, it was when you think you're down to it and someone may just give you that little bit of inspiration, just a little kick in the butt. Hey, you told me this would go. And I got up and I pulled myself together. I said, let's do it. And lo and behold, it started the whole process. And here we are.
So, Robert, you would have seen me glance at my phone because you reminded me of like a quote I saw it on Instagram, and I'll send it to you later on WhatsApp. But it says, "If you fail, congratulations. Most people don't even
Yeah.
try." Yeah. So
Yeah, no,
good on
yeah,
you.
yeah. And even what I learned from that, here's what I learned is that even everything Tommy said, focus on Canada's podcast, just do what works. And and in Europe, it maybe wasn't meant to expand, but if there's just the slightest little light or glimmer or something trying to tell you something, right? And if it's just to satisfy someone else and you stick to your word, right? And if it's that small, that little, and then for some reason, doing that caused a chain reaction. And then things just started. And then I went to Dubai, found another company that wanted to partner with me in Malta. And then it just built up from there.
So quite a journey, starting with the advertising space and kind of navigating through traditional media, and then the online media. Now we're kind of in the AI age, or just at the start of it. But through that journey, you've had your successes, and you've kind of expanded your business. But what would you say you're most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of my vision. If you people that I've talked to, when I, day-to-day stuff I'm okay at, but I think as far as people have said, you're a great visionary. Yeah, I can see Vancouver Entrepreneur, the small little thing where I'm interviewing people in local events and then saying, what if I did this across Canada? What if I did this across Europe? What if I did this because I went to Dubai and I was there and I started showing people, and one guy said to me when I was there, I'll never forget it. He says, can you do this in the UAE? And I said, sure, I guess we could. And so, and then I thought, what if I do this and I want to do this in Asia next, and I want to do it in Africa next. And so I want to build this up. So we got this kind of a global network where we got entrepreneurs, listening to each other. My dream is to have an entrepreneur, say in Japan or Dubai, listening to an entrepreneur in Vancouver or Toronto or wherever that is. So we're all different cultures, different languages. We're all different people, but entrepreneurs all speak the same language. We all want to grow. We all want to build our business. We all want to make money, right? So, and we all want to find acceptance, and we tend to not want to just stay within our little tiny little country because we're in the world of internet and the world of AI and all these things. There's no reason just to stay in your hometown anymore. And so why couldn't someone, like our interview, why couldn't someone listen to it in a different country? And people say, well, why don't you just have one particular podcast that does all, because it reaches international? I said, but I like the regional personality and the flavor of having a European podcast, a Canadian podcast. I like that flavor of being able, and the grassroots being, hey, we're talking to local entrepreneurs that live and work in Canada or live and work in Europe. And I don't want to get too spread out where it's just a general podcast. I want to keep the flavor, the culture, the people, the languages. Well, most of it's in English within that particular mainstream podcast. And then we also have World's podcast. So everything will kind of branch into that. But all the other stuff I'm kind of okay at. I can do it, not great at, but I think visionary would be one of the things I'd lean on if I was to say, what's your strength? And I'd say that's it.
So with the things that have gone well and the growth to this point, what challenges do you think the podcast industry faces right now? Are there any bottlenecks or any ways that some things that frustrate you about it?
Yeah, I think it's very saturated, to be honest. It's a very saturated market. I think easy entry, things like that. It's a game. It's an area that it's all about longevity, playing the long game. Think unless you're a celebrity, if you're a celebrity or if you got something uh, unique or you're well known, trying to compete against the Joe Rogans of the world, the Tim Ferrisses of the world, that's a whole different league. I think you got to find your niche, what you're good at and what you genuinely like to do. It's not really about putting yourself first. It's about putting other people first, the listener, your guest, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to contrive from this listener or from the person you're interviewing, and the value you can bring to the listener. So you kind of got to remove yourself from that and be able to pull content and that people want to listen to, but also that is going to be able to, scale, right? For me, scaling meant not staying in Vancouver and just doing Vancouver entrepreneurs like Vancouver Tech, things like that. I always felt, why couldn't we all share our ideas right across the world and make it more of a homogenous where people are learning from each other? And I've always been, because my advertising background, I always worked with television networks. I always dealt with radio networks. I always dealt with magazine networks. I always dealt with all different types of networks. And I said, what if we built a podcast network? Not maybe like a radio station or but where it was not just in one particular market, but global. And our format was how making educational self-development and how we can all learn from each other, whether you're learning from someone in Dubai, whether you're Riyadh, where you're learning from Japan, whatever it is. We all want to be able, because there's a lot of people I feel you could connect from someone could hear your podcast and go, I really like what you're saying, and I've got this thing I'm doing. Why don't we talk? And you cannot be at every single networking event across the world. You just can't do it. There's just too much. But if you could hop on a podcast and go, you know what? I want to know what's going on in Paris, France, and then see what's going on. Oh, there's 20 different entrepreneurs in Paris, France, 20 different entrepreneurs in Dubai, 20, and kind of get a crash course in exactly what's going on there, because the questions we ask are not all about them. I ask questions about where they work and what's the entrepreneurial climate there, what's the vibe there, and what's the networking capabilities like there to get started.
So in the podcasting space, which is fairly new, not as let's say old school as other industries, is there a space for AI or automation to contribute to the podcast world?
Yeah, yeah,
What are your thoughts there?
yeah. Here's where I'm going to crossroads with AI. I haven't really talked about this yet, but there's a lot of stuff people still want humans and human content, human writing, things like that. I love AI. If I could use AI for everything, for all my posts, for all my content, but people still, I think if you were to read uh, an AI blog, for example, or a human written blog, which one would you read?
I think I default to the human written one.
Yeah, and so I like to do with especially with Europe is because I'm not there obviously, and I know Vancouver like the back of my hand. I'm from there. I know every street, every nook, every cranny, so I can speak genuinely about that city. I cannot speak about Toronto, which is why the first thing I did was get someone in Toronto who I knew. But it's easy for me to do a blog or build content around, say, Strasbourg, France, or some small town where an entrepreneur is, and seem like I know that area and the AI's enabled me to do that. It's not authentic. It's just, had them write it and things like that. So I often think to myself, is this what people want? And can I get away with it? Can I cheat my way around it? So people, say, well, I had a conversation with the European Commission the other day, and they said, well, you're not even from Europe. And I said, yeah, I know, but the hosts are there. And AI has kind of enabled me to write content around, like when I write stuff for the site, I hop on and I get the pointers about that particular country. I write the content, and me and AI have this conversation about what's the best. And is this AI detectable? Is this, does this look like human content? Or is this like, after a while, to be honest, I get a little lazy. Instead of writing the content, I'll just get AI to do it and publish it. You know what I mean? And then I kind of feel bad because it's great. It reads great. It's exactly what I want, but I didn't write it, but it's perfect. And so I'm at a crossroads of like, do I take that down and go back to typing it myself? Because people like you want to have a human blog or a human written page. So for me, not being from Europe, I can put together 4 or 5 pages because we launched Ireland, we launched Sweden, we launched Estonia, and all this stuff. I've never been to half these places. AI, man, I'm just on top of that thing, and it helps me feel like I'm living, being, and being part of that whole environment. And it's my ultimate cheat code. But there is a point where I do feel, okay, well, the search engines like it because I've been told that search engines don't like AI written copy or AI written content. And so for me, I'm like, okay, so fair enough. I'll write it myself. But the AI kind of is a little bit better in my ways. So, but I do like using AI where it becomes my partner, where I say to AI, give me 10 points about Estonia that I can write about. And then we have this back and forth. And when I got it right, then we publish it.
Yeah, and it doesn't get impatient. It doesn't give you attitude. It just whatever you want, it keeps spitting it out and refines and refines. So
Yeah.
it's funny, you mentioned SEO and web friendly content. You may have heard about generative engine automation. So going from SEO to GEO, which is now 0 clicks. It's kind of that AI summary that pops up and needing to get into that space. But even in the podcast platform, like it's written or verbal, the one really cool thing about technology in general and AIs is if, let's say, if you're from one part of Europe and you want to listen to it to a podcast in another part of Europe, but it's not your native tongue, then, AI can help kind of translate that and
Yeah.
just, yeah, makes the world so accessible.
But are we cheating? So if I was to take, say, Emirates podcast, and I was just to say, this is going to be my 100% AI baby. It's going to do everything for me on the AI, all the content, will people still want that as opposed to more of the human touch to it? And I'm still at a crossroads with that.
Fair point. It is such a interesting moral, ethical, even internal debate, right? Because yeah, we want to provide what people want, and so we kind of struggle with the best way to do that. I totally get it.
Yeah, for me, if I could just say, build me asiaspodcast.com, build the whole thing for me, write it all for me, do it all, launch it, and I don't want to do a thing. And then it does. And then will people accept it going, well, this whole thing is AI? Or they go, I don't care. This is perfect. I don't know what the acceptance rate is for something like that. For me, I'm old school. I still like humans. I still like to interact with humans, listen to, and but AI is where we're at. And I wish that I could just let AI do everything and I don't want to hear the complaining, or the preference for humans.
So, as a visionary, have you thought about where you want to be using AI or not, based on your comfort level, in the next 6, 12, 24 months? Have you mapped that out, or are you kind of playing that by ear right now?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm leaning more. I love doing these podcasts and stuff like that, but I'm kind of leaning to the face to face at the podcast on location, podcast mics, cameras, and having a face to face podcast. And we did that in Lisbon. And like I said, it went really, really well. We're going to be in Vancouver for Web Summit, and we're going to be on location with Canada's podcast in the interviewing entrepreneurs throughout Canada. We've done that before. It was funny because back in 2019, this is before they had podcast booths. We had come to Collision, which is Web Summit in Toronto, which is massive back then. It was huge. And we literally brought in our own cameras, all our own stuff, our hosts, our cameras, our audio people, everyone. We came into the media village and we just literally walked into the back where they have these meeting rooms. We shut the door on it and we set up all of our equipment. And the head tech guy who managed all the cameras and everything, he said, your job is to make sure that no one comes through that door that tells me to move because it's going to take me a day to move my stuff. So my job was to wander out on the floor and a stream of entrepreneurs to be interviewed so that management at Collision wouldn't come in and go, what is this? What are you doing here? This is before the podcast booth was even a thought. And so I was just, and I would take the mic, I take my camera guy and a sound guy, and we walk up to people, microphone, what do you got? What are you doing? What's your goals? What do you want to accomplish here? Who are you talking to? Are you achieving your, and so we would talk to people about their entrepreneurial journey and go around to the next, and we bring people into the booth and we'd be walking the floor. It was a lot of fun. It was really great. And we published a massive amount of content. And, it's kind of strange. You can imagine you being at a booth. I'm coming to your booth, lights, cameras, and everything, and mic in your face saying, tell me about your company. What are you trying to do here? What are you trying to achieve? And what's it look like for you? Making any contacts? Are you getting any clients? And it was great. And people were, yeah, I want to talk about it. And we got a great response. And then Web Summit saw what we were doing booth on behalf of Web Summit, who puts it on every year.
Wow, very cool. That
Yeah.
is almost guerrilla marketing, just getting in there and making it
It
happen.
was, yeah. I distinctly remember saying they had cornered this part in the media village. And then I said, "Can I take your camera guy with me?" And he goes, "Yeah, where are you going with him?" I said, "I'm going with, give me a microphone, give me the thing." I took everything out. I just walked the floor, walked up to booths when obviously they were not talking to someone. They had a moment. I said, "Do you have a moment to talk?" And yeah, it was at the booth and then walking the floor. And yeah, it's guerrilla podcasting. There's a term.
I like it. We're in real time. So, Robert, we talked about the saturation in the podcast space, but have you noticed or have you seen any other trends impacting the space?
Yeah, getting back to AI again, I remember this one. I was talking to one fella out of the US. He was showing me that there's a woman that is uh, doing podcasts, and then she created an avatar, and she was using that avatar to do. I'm sure you've heard of this, right? And the avatar was doing the podcasts, and I thought, wow, that's where this industry is going. So you don't need me anymore. You don't. The humans are out, right? You can get an avatar, and you can get the avatar of the person like you, and say we're going to create an avatar of you, and we're going to personalize it, and then we're going to have me being AI, you being AI, and we publish AI content, and not one human element is in it. I think that is an area that we may go. You may down the road, you may see non-human, but the human element is that they just take and I guess do a quick interview, like maybe 30 seconds of you. AI goes, okay, I've got Serge, I've got Robert. Now I'm going to create a podcast and let them run with it. Because you'd be able to create just tons and tons of content. No one gets tired.
Yeah, ain't that the truth, buddy? We need a break once in a while, but you know,
But again, will people accept it? Would you rather listen to that or humans?
it's funny. When you asked me the first time, I defaulted to human, but then I had that thought, human, or if I don't know it's human, it might be okay. Like if I think it's human and it's not, then would I know the difference? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's that good now, right? When I'm on social media now and I see something, I often I go into the comments right away, and I'll say, "This is AI." Okay, skip.
Yeah, and
It's
your brand.
undetectable. It's undetectable for me.
Yes, you're right. A year ago, maybe even as recent as that, 2 years ago for sure, you could tell if it was AI produced, 100%. And now it's getting a little more trickier.
Yes.
But with what you're doing these days, or maybe through Canada's podcast or Europe's podcast or the Emirates podcast, just through the process, are you seeing opportunities to automate things or incorporate AI into the business, or do you think it's kind of found its sweet spot?
I think it's kind of found the sweet spot. I think I'd like to get it to do more production stuff would be great. I think I'd like to get into that part of it. I still have a guy that does all my video editing. For example, we don't use Riverside, we still use Zoom, and he does a lot of editing and things like that. That's the human element on it too. So for me, I would, if I could live in a world where we maybe do human to human conversation like we are doing now, and then pass it on to AI bots and AI agents and all that kind of stuff. And they crank all the production and then do all the social media. They do all the content, write all the stuff. And so I would love that. Now, here's the reason why I think Canada's podcast, because I was able to get hosts because I told them, I said, the problem with Vancouver Entrepreneur back when I started it is I was doing everything. And I was this classic guy editing things at 3 in the morning on GarageBand and do the interviews and drinking my herbal tea. And it's 3 in the morning. I got to be at work at 8. And I was doing absolutely everything. And I said to myself, what if all I had to do was the interview? All I had to do was do the interview, upload everything, and I'm done. And so I took that fundamental and I took that across Canada. I went to each host that I found vetted and I said to them, you don't have to do anything. If you just interview this person 30 minutes, here's the script, here's what you need to follow. You upload it to a project manager and you're done. You do not do anything. We will take it all from there. We have a social media team, we have a production team, we have a content team, we have all these people that do everything. And so for me, that was a dream. I'll never forget the first time once we had everything in place for Canada, and I did my first interview. And I just uploaded it to the project manager and I felt, what a relief. No more editing it till 3 a.m. to get all the little stuff out and get the intros in and and I thought to myself, the interview is the fun part. All the other stuff is really difficult. This is why I got into it. And AI, I would love to have do everything. So it is my one big employee. I do the interview and I walk away.
So, Robert, how can people find out more about you or your platforms, Canada's podcast, Europe's podcast, Emirates podcast? Where would you direct those people?
Yeah. So I would go to canadaspodcast.com, real easy. Just type in canadaspodcast.com, or you can reach me at Robert at Canada's Podcast. Same with Europe, europespodcast.com, Robert at europespodcast.com, as well as Emirates is .io, and Vancouver Entrepreneur is .ca. And you can reach me at any of those. And that's the best way to get hold of me. Whatever, if you want to talk about a particular brand, that's fine. Usually I'm checking vancouverentrepreneur.ca pretty well all the time, but it's a long email. So if you want to hit me up at Robert at Canada's Podcast, you can reach me there. And if you want to come on the podcast, things like that, happy to have you on.
Well, it's always really cool for me personally to see a Vancouver guy making moves globally and really challenging your own comfort level, being able to scale. And it seems like you're natural at that. Like, why not expand it into other markets? So, congratulations. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you. I think one of the things too is that I've learned over time is I'm not afraid of failure. If I know that my chances of survival are 1 in a million, I'll take that one chance, and sure enough, I'll end up on my face. But I'll find another way, or someone like that guy who kept bugging me to publish my episode. So, sometimes you don't got to. It's not you pulling yourself off the ground. It's maybe a friend or someone else that can do that. But my goal is to create this vision, and if it comes at my cost sometimes, my humility sometimes, so be it. I hope that I get what I achieve and everyone benefits from it.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on the AI Surge podcast, where we explore how AI is shaping industries and accelerating innovation. I'm your host, Serge Upel, and today I'd like to thank Robert Schmeichel, founder of Canada's Podcast, Europe's Podcast, and Emirates Podcast, to talk about his fascinating journey. Robert, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Serge. It's been a pleasure.
And for those of you listening, feel free to check back to the AI Surge YouTube channel for more episodes.